right, welcome back. So today begins a new unit. We'll start with nervous tissue, talking about what it's used for, some basics of its function and the different cells that are involved. Friday, I will be covering nervous physiology, so a little bit more in-depth about how they actually send signals. There is a weekly quiz that's already posted. It's for today and Friday's lecture. I just happened to get ahead of work a little bit this week, so it is up, but it has material from both of these content. The exam, I am in the process of grading. I should have it finished by this afternoon, so those grades will go up. If you have any questions, of course, reach out to me. And the last announcement I have is that Dr. Kono is back on campus and feels ready to take over, and so he will be starting back as your full-time professor on Monday. So I'm just covering these first two lectures of this unit, and then he will take over from there. I believe I've talked with him briefly. It sounds like he's going to probably keep those weekend quizzes as his form of quiz going forward. But other than that, I'm not quite sure what is going to change, how it's going to integrate. So be ready with questions on Monday if you have them. All right, so on to today's content, which is why there's no Socrative, because I'm not going to keep taking attendance since I'm not going to be recording my lectures anymore. So today and Friday, and that'll be it. All right, so the nervous system. It is considered an organ system, just like we have the digestive system or the respiratory system. It is a collection of tissues that are all working to achieve the same goal. And in this case, it's coordinating sensation, so the process of picking up information from the world around us, interpreting that information, processing it, and then responding with an action as needed. That is all dealt with our nervous system. So nervous tissue is one of our four main categories. We've already covered muscle, you would have covered epithelial, and then connective as well. Those are the four big ones. So this is the last of the four main tissue types covered in A&P 1. And again, its job is sensation, picking up information about the world around us, relaying that information very rapidly, and then responding to it. The fast relaying is one of the most important parts of this. There are other systems in our body for communication, particularly chemical communication, hormones. They are fast, but they are nowhere near as fast as the communication that is enabled by our nerves. It is a near instantaneous process. So there are two basic forms or types of signals that can be sent through our nerves. The sensation signal is, again, anything that is interacting with us. So the sensation of touching, sight is a sensation, any pressures that you're feeling, that's all sensory information that you can pick up, that something is happening to you or the world around you. The second category is motor signal, which is going to be the actual signal to tell your tissues to do something. So in the last unit, we were talking about motor units, and that a signal would be sent down that neuron, and it would trigger a bunch of muscle cells to contract. That's that second category, the motor signal being sent to your muscles to achieve something. So in this figure, you can see we have someone touching a cactus, the sensation of pain. That will be relayed through a specific category of neuron. It will be processed, and then you will respond through a signal through your motor neuron, move away from the thing that is causing you pain. That is what we call a response loop. So the process of picking up sensory information, processing that information, and responding to it in some way. That is your response loop for every sensation that we process. Some sensations are things that we need to respond to immediately, like touching a cactus. You don't want to keep doing that. Some things, your body takes in that sensation, processes it, and recognizes that nothing needs to be done. So you sit in your chair. That's not a sensation, that's a pressure. It's not a sensation you need to respond to. And so your body's not going to send any signals that says, move, get out of the way, whatever your response might need to be. So sensory input is going to be a signal coming into the central nervous system. I'll come back to these other two words in a little bit. We are then going to integrate the response, and then the motor output is going out of the central nervous system. So all response loops are centered around the central nervous system, either coming in or leaving it. The nervous system has two major divisions. There is the central nervous system, CNS, and your peripheral nervous system, the PNS. The distinction between them is mostly structural. The actual function, the sending of those signals, is virtually identical. It's mostly how do you actually build the structure of the central nervous system tissue and how do you build the structure of the peripheral nervous system tissue. So the bare basics, the central nervous system is going to consist of two parts, the brain and the spinal cord. That is all it is. These are able to receive signals and send signals in response. The spinal cord structurally is almost identical to the organization of the brain. It's just a inferior attachment. So it's going to project down from the brain. It is connected at the base of the brain down here through the brainstem. The biggest difference between them is that of the signals that are being processed and sent, consciousness only exists in the brain and only exists in a very small portion of the brain. So the spinal cord has no consciousness whatsoever. The peripheral nervous system, PNS, is going to be all the rest of the nerves. Everything that is connected to the spinal cord or to the brain. So if it's not those two things, it belongs in the peripheral nervous system. And so you're going to have these series of nerves leaving the brainstem and running out to all of your tissues throughout your entire body. You can think of it as a relay network. Again, the peripheral nervous system is going to be picking up that sensation. Anything that's coming into contact with any part of your body, that signal is being picked up by your peripheral nerves. It will be sent to the central nervous system, to the spinal cord, possibly up to the brain, depends on the signal. We respond to that signal by then sending out that motor signal through those peripheral nerves. Again, if I need to remove my hand, I move that or the signal tells me to move. So there are two terms that are applied to the types of neurons based on essentially what kind of signal they're sending, which is based on where is that signal going. So these were on the previous slide. An afferent signal is any signal coming into the central nervous system. So we're picking it up in the peripheral and it's going to the central nervous system, afferent. Efferent with an E is any signal leaving the central nervous system. So I always remember efferent is exiting the central nervous system, E to E. So if those are the two directions, which of these two would represent a sensory, a sensation signal? The afferent, yes, because it is going from the peripheral to the central nervous system. So afferent is sensory, and that means efferent is going to be our motor signals. So neurons are the individual nervous tissue cells. So just like we had the muscle fiber, which was equivalent to the muscle cell in our muscle unit, now we have neurons, which is the nervous tissue cell. They're going to be the most important cells within our nervous tissue, but they are not the only cells. There's a whole separate category that I'll get to later in this lecture. They are the ones that are responsible for actually sending and receiving those signals. So they sense things and or relay information. So this response loop that I've been talking about, sensing something in the peripheral, this is going to be a neuron. It's going to synapse or communicate with another neuron in our central nervous system. And then that neuron's going to communicate with another neuron, sending out that motor signal. So the entire response system just involves a series of neurons communicating with each other. Once again, extremely quick. It is a near instantaneous process. The best example I can always think of is if you touch a hot stove, you don't need to sit and wait for that signal to process. You will instantaneously, without thinking about it, take your hand off of the hot stove, because that signal was sent near instantaneous. Not just to the central nervous system, but to the central nervous system and back. It's been processed, the whole thing happened in just a blink of an eye. So the neurons are those individual cells. We are going to bundle those neurons together into a larger structure that is called a nerve. So the nerve is the thing in the body that we actually give names to. So just like we named the muscle bodies on our skeleton, we are going to name different nerves. They are going to be enclosed by a sheath of protective connective tissue, just like our muscle bodies were. This time we're calling them epineurium. So epi is again for outside, just like the epimysium when we were talking about muscles. Mysium referred to muscle, neurium refers to nerves. So it's the suffix here that's telling you what it belongs to. Just a layer of dense fibrous connective tissue containing everything within it. Within a single nerve, there will be multiple neurons, so multiple of those cells running down their length. And there will also be vasculature, so arteries and veins that are supplying blood to those cells, supplying them with the oxygen that they need to survive, supplying them with glucose and all the other ions that they need to process. All of that is coming from the bloodstream held within the nerve. So like I said, many nerves are going to be large enough that they are given names. We will, at the end of this lecture, go through the list of nerves that you are expected to know for both lecture and lab. The list is significantly smaller than the muscle list. The muscle list was the big one for the semester. And I always like to stress, it is by no means comprehensive. The number of named neurons or nerves in the body it's huge. It's more than the number of muscles. And it's just an extensive list that is beyond the scope of this class. So we're going to focus on the big ones that process most of the information to the major parts of our body. So every nerve is going to represent multiple neurons. Those neurons are traveling together because they have to go somewhere similar. It makes more sense to take 5 different neurons and bundle them into one structure in the arm to get all the way down to the hand, rather than to have individual strings running down the entire length of the arm. That gets complicated. It runs the risk of more damage if you injure any part of that structure. So it's better to bundle several neurons together if they're going to the same place. Once they reach or get near their destination, we will start to see that those neurons start to split off to get to their very specific destinations. So a neuron is going to be packaged together with other neurons inside a nerve, but that does not mean that that neuron can never exit that nerve. If we need to hop from this side of the arm to that side of the arm, our nerves do intersect and meet up with each other. So there are several places in the body where we have dedicated junctions. This is a place where our nerves meet up and split multiple times, so that whatever neuron we need, let's say it's coming off of the cervical 7 layer of our spinal cord, it's coming down here, it needs to go to the front of my arm, so it's going to jump onto this nerve, and it's going to run down to reach its destination. It's just a train junction, if you will. It's going to have a whole bunch of them converge and then split off to go to whatever the space is. These are called plexuses. There are several major plexuses in the body, major junctions. There are 3 that I will ask you to know, and we'll get to those again when we name our nerves at the end. So let's go back to the cell, the neuron. There are different parts of the neuron, and each are responsible for different jobs in the signaling process. The easiest thing to find is going to be the cell body. That's going to be this big expansion, typically found at one end of our neuron. This is going to be where the nucleus is housed. Nucleus is always found in the cell body. When you're looking at it in tissue slides, that is one of the easiest things to spot because it's always a dark purple circle right in the center. This is also where most of the metabolism of the neuron happens. So the mitochondria exist here, any of the organelles that are needed to keep that cell functioning, that's all housed within that cell body. Coming off of the cell body will be a number of different kinds of projections. Some of them are going to be short and very branched. Others will be singular and elongated. So we have names for those structures. The axon is that single lengthened branch coming off of the cell body. It will have branches towards the end, but along the length of it, there will be very minimal branching. Dendrites typically surround the rest of the cell body. These are going to be shorter. They are typically heavily branched, so they will branch multiple times right near that cell body. And that's typically how you're going to see the difference in a tissue slide. You'll see lots of heavily branched structures and then one that just looks a lot slimmer, a lot more slender exiting the cell body. As for their roles, the dendrites are what receive signal. So if I am detecting pressure from touching something on the surface, it is the dendrites that are picking up that signal. That signal will be processed through the cell body and then relayed down the axon. So the axon is going to be where we are sending the signal to a new destination. If it's back to the central nervous system or if it's to our muscles, it's running down the length of the axon. So receiving signals here, communicating signals, and then if we have to jump onto a new target, that can happen at the very tip. So here's a figure showing you. This is what you'll probably see more in lab. This is taken with a much more high-powered microscope in SEM. But you can see there's a large expansion. That's your cell body. Cell body. This one you can see the nucleus present. And then you see these small kind of wiggly projections. A lot of them branch at their tips. Those are all going to be dendrites. Same thing down here. And then this long, skinny one, lot straighter, less branching. That's going to be your axon. In this case, this one has this structure for an axon. This is a very short neuron, probably something from the central nervous system itself. There are several neurons, so a single cell in our body, that are over several feet long. So they're running from the spinal cord all the way down to the tips of your limbs. So those ones can be much, much more elongated. So we put all of those neurons, one after the other, and then they communicate whatever signal is being sent between each set of neurons. So in this case, again, picking up a pressure signal is going to be picked up by the dendrites. It will be relayed along the axon. That signal will be communicated to the next neuron in the cycle through its dendrites, down through the axon, signal sent to the next set of dendrites, all the way down to wherever the destination is. So again, we have two categories: sensory neurons, anything responsible for picking up sensation and then relaying that sensation back to the central nervous system. And then our motor neurons. Those are going to be coming from the central nervous system and sending their signals to the other tissues, typically things like muscles and glands, telling them do something, contract, make a chemical, produce more of that chemical, slow down that production. There's all sorts of different signals that can be sent that fall under motor information. Most nerves, so again, the nerve is the bundle of neurons, is going to start by carrying both that sensory and motor information. So both types of neurons are going to be running through a single nerve structure. Once they get closer to their destination, then we will see that those neurons are going to split into separate nerves, and each of those little nerve branches will be responsible for either sensation or motor. By the time they reach their destination, they're not doing both anymore. They've separated them to be specialized. So this example here is the ulnar nerve, one of the ones I will ask you to know, running down the ulnar side of the arm. By the time at the beginning, it's carrying both sensation and motor. By the time it gets to your wrist, it's going to split. One of its branches is going to be the motor branch of the ulnar nerve, and it gives motor signals to the muscles in your hand. The other branch branches off to the side, the pinky side, is the sensory branch of the ulnar nerve, and that one is specifically picking up cutaneous or skin sensation on just this portion of your hand. It is only responsible for the pinky, half of the ring finger, and then a portion of the palm. The different types of neurons, so sensory and motor, are going to have different shapes. And again, as long as you know what the job is, you can match it to the specific shape so that each individual shape won't be doing more than one job. There will be something specific to motor, something specific to sensation. And that would be these two. So multipolar, this is the form of neuron that I've been showing you so far. We have a cell body at one end surrounded by dendrites, single long axon coming off of it. Multipolar neuron. This one will have many dendrites and will typically be your motor neuron. So motor to multipolar, M to M, they match up. The second category is pseudo-unipolar, a little bit longer of a name. This one, we take that cell body and rather than having it at one end with the dendrites, the cell body gets shoved off to the side. And essentially what this is doing is bypassing the cell body entirely. So the signal being picked up by these dendrites doesn't need to make its way through the cell body, it can just shoot straight down the axon. So it's just a fraction of a second faster. These are going to be for our sensation neurons, any of our sensory neurons. Oh, and I always forget, that figure again was from a textbook. The actual figure labels it incorrectly. They call it a unipolar. It is a pseudo-unipolar. It still has a dendrite. It's located on one end. They are confusing it with a unipolar, which has no dendrites at either end. So sensation, any type of pressure, temperature, anything you are sensing is going to be sent along a pseudo-unipolar cell. The nucleus is shoved off to the side. It is effectively one long axon where we can pick up a signal in the dendrite, immediately put it into that axon, travel along its length, and be interpreted at the other end. These are only going to be used for those afferent signals. Again, A, so sensation going to the central nervous system. Those are all going to be our pseudo-unipolar cells. Motor cells are multipolar. So again, M to M. They will have many dendrites. They're going to have a cell body centralized with a long axon coming off of it. And these are going to be making sure that whatever that signal to move, to make more of something, to change behavior is going to be picked up. Plenty of dendrites to pick up that signal from the previous neuron. These will be our efferent signals, which means motor signals leaving the central nervous system, heading out to the peripheral to change behavior somewhere in our tissues. All right, so that's the very basics of our neuron cells. We're going to now talk about the other cells of nervous tissue. So the other things that are found in our nervous system that are not specifically the cells designed for relaying information. These all fall under the larger category called glial cells, and you can think of them as accessory or helper cells. Their job is not to pick up and relay information. That is exclusively for the neurons. Their job is to help maintain those neurons and the job that they have to do. So they're going to assist in that process. The first is called a Schwann cell. Schwann cells are responsible for creating myelin sheaths around the axon of my neuron. So these little blue, almost donut-looking rings, that is a myelin sheath. We'll come back to myelin in a little bit, but the purpose is for insulating that neuron. Insulating means it's not conducting electricity. What that allows is that the signal traveling down that axon can travel faster because it's not allowed to dissipate through the edges of the cell. We're insulating the outer core, so it's not allowed to dissipate that signal. So it's helping to keep that signal strong and traveling fast. Now, Schwann cells provide myelin sheaths specifically to the nerves in our peripheral nervous system, which is the key difference with the next category, which are the oligodendrocytes, myelin sheath to the central nervous system. That's the biggest difference, is what portion of our nervous system are they providing this insulation to. So the job's the same, electrically insulate, it's just a different destination. There is a minor structural difference. If I go back, my Schwann cell rings a single axon, like a little donut. The oligodendrocytes, there's going to be a cell body with multiple branches, putting myelin sheaths on multiple central nervous system neurons. The biggest difference there is because in our peripheral, those neurons are much more isolated, so they're singular structures, whereas in our central nervous system, the neurons are much shorter, so there's a whole lot of them packed really tight together. So a single oligodendrocyte can provide this insulation to multiple neurons right next to it. Astrocytes, also in the central nervous system. So we will not find an astrocyte in the peripheral nervous system. The name comes from its star-like shape. So it's going to have a cell body with multiple little branches coming off to either side. No definable axon. Again, it's not communicating a signal. It's going to be an in-between our bloodstream and our central nervous system. So it's going to attach to the bloodstream, the blood supply coming into our central nervous system, and to the surrounding neurons of the central nervous system itself, acting like a little bridge. So two roles: structural support. It makes sure that the neurons of our central nervous system remain where they need to go. And it will communicate anything from our bloodstream needing to get to our central nervous system. The reason we have a special cell that is specific to this job is because our brain has something special. This is not found in any other tissue. We protect our central nervous system with what we call the blood-brain barrier. It is a specific set of tissues, a specific category of tissues that create our blood vessels that prevent most materials from actually going from the blood to the central nervous system. The reason for that is because your brain is super important. We don't want to damage that tissue. And so it's easier to gate access to that brain and then assist the movement of the things we do need through the astrocytes than it is to let things freely exchange. We'd rather gate that process. So if we had, for example, pathogens, perhaps there's some sort of virus traveling through your bloodstream, we don't want that virus to just diffuse into your central nervous system. That could be extremely detrimental. Instead, the blood-brain barrier prevents that pathogen from getting through. Instead, we have the astrocytes, who will take the glucose, the oxygen, the ions that the central nervous system does need, and selectively takes that from the bloodstream, transports it over to the neurons, and keeps them functioning. So it's all because of this protective barrier. We also have ependymal cells. These are also exclusive to the central nervous system. So you're getting the picture. The central nervous system is really important, and we have to protect it and maintain it. So there's a lot of specialized cells for the central nervous system. Its job is to secrete cerebrospinal fluid. That is going to be the somewhat viscous fluid that is surrounding your brain and your spinal cord, essentially keeping your brain floating within the skull. Now, it's not free floating, it's not bouncing around, but it is cushioned by this layer of fluid. And that fluid is being produced by these ependymal cells. They act like epithelial cells, so they create a single layer around the tissue, and then they are secreting that fluid into the space. The only reason that we don't call them epithelial cells is because they are specific to the central nervous system, so they just get their own category. They all have cilia. So cilia are little finger-like projections of the plasma membrane that push up into that central nervous system space, and they can wiggle them, so wiggling their little fingers. If you take your fingers and put them in a bucket of water and wiggle them, you create a current, right? That water moves around your fingers. It's the same thing in the central nervous system. The cilia are moving, and they are making a current within the cerebrospinal fluid. So they're keeping that fluid moving. And then microglia. So So these are going to be phagocytic cells. Phagocytic means consuming. So phagocytosis is the process of consuming something else. So these are part of the immune system specific to the central nervous system. Again, we've separated it from the rest of our functions because we want to protect that system as much as possible. So they are going to act like other immune cells, other white blood cells within the central nervous system to consume anything that could be detrimental. If it's a pathogen that gets into the central nervous system, these will be triggered to chase it down and essentially destroy it. Or if we have damaged or dying cells within the central nervous system, those can also cause problems. And so the microglia will surround them and digest them for their parts. So there are cleaners from our central nervous system. So here's a nervous tissue cell, or tissue slide. This is very like what you will see in lab in a couple of weeks. Here again, I have my cell body, nice dark nucleus in the center, my wavy, short, branching dendrites, one single long axon. So which kind of neuron category shape would this be?
Motor neuron?
It's a motor neuron, which falls under the multipolar shape category. And all of that, my neuron tissue, is going to be surrounded by this very fibrous, dense material, and you see all these other little nuclei dotting that space. Those are all glia. Those are all the helper cells, the ones that are maintaining that neuron so that it can effectively send the signals it needs to. All right, so I said I was going to cycle back to myelin. So many of our neurons are coated with this insulating material. Again, it helps to make sure that a signal remains strong and that it can be sent very, very quickly. We create myelin through Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. The purpose is for electrical insulation. The reason they are electrically insulating is that these cells create and store a layer of fat. And fat does not conduct electricity. That is how it accomplishes that insulation job. So by surrounding that neuron by this layer of fat, we insulate it, we can relay information more quickly, more effectively, and particularly keep it strong over long distances. Remember, I said a couple of our neurons are several feet long. It needs to send a near instantaneous signal over that entire length. This insulation is what allows that to happen. Now, we do have unmyelinated axons, but it's a terrible name because they still have myelin. Again, I don't decide these things. That's just how we named them. The difference is that rather than completely surrounding that neuron with fat, we leave little pockets open, little windows. So if I drew this in cross-section, a myelinated axon, so here's my neurons running down the center, is completely surrounded by myelin. No exposure of that neuron to the outside extracellular fluid. In an unmyelinated axon, that neuron is going to have kind of segmented portions of myelin, which means this little bit right here is exposed to the extracellular fluid. So it still has myelin, it is still insulated, we're still achieving that fast signal, but we've exposed a small portion of it. And there's a reason for it. That'll be future lectures. So my neurons are carrying signals down their length. The signal starts at one end, is picked up by our dendrites, sent down an axon, and then it's going to often need to communicate that signal to another neuron in the process, whether that's into the central nervous system or between separate neurons within the peripheral. They need to be able to communicate. They communicate at the tip of the axon where we have axon terminals. So that's where the actual sending of a signal between neurons happen. This is called a synapse. Any junction between two neurons or a neuron communicating with a cell. So the signal is going to need to jump from the axon terminal across that synapse to the target cell. Again, that target cell could be another neuron sending that signal further down the line, or it could be the muscle cell or a gland communicating that final motor signal of change the behavior somehow. It's always across a synapse. There are different kinds of synapses. The most common form is a synaptic cleft, which we have seen before. That is a physical gap between the axon terminal and the target cell. So there's an actual empty space where extracellular fluid flows between them. They communicate by releasing neurotransmitters, which are messenger chemical molecules stored in the ends of my axon terminal. We're releasing those neurotransmitters across the synaptic cleft. They will be picked up by receptors in the target cell. This is what we saw in muscle contraction. So we saw the action potential coming down our neuron, releasing acetylcholine was the neurotransmitter in that specific case. Acetylcholine came across the synaptic cleft and was picked up by the ligand-gated sodium channels on my muscle cell. All right, so the last bit here, which is just under 15 minutes, we should be okay. We are going to run through the nerves that you would be expected to be able to identify, to name for lecture, lab, all of those things. For each, what I want you to know is where in the body is it located, so where can you find that nerve? How would you identify it? So what are the sorts of things you would use to make sure it's this one and not this one? And branching order relative to other nerves. What I mean by that is, especially when we're talking about the arm and the leg, several will start as a single larger nerve, and it will split into other smaller nerves. And so you need to know which ones are splitting into others. There is a biodigital model for this. I forgot to link it. I'll do it after class. I will just say that it is not as helpful, I think, as the muscle unit biodigital models, because nerves are so much more branching. And so it's hard to isolate a single one when it's going to branch 20 different times along its length. So I will put it up there. You can certainly use it for practice. Just keep in mind it is a little bit more complex than just looking at muscles. All right, so plexus, junction of nerves, where they can jump from one nerve to the other, swapping neurons, making sure that each neuron can get to its appropriate destination. As I said, there are 3. So these are major bundles, major junctions coming off of the spinal cord. The first is the cervical plexus. That is named for its position. Where have we seen cervical? It's previous unit. What is the name for the bones in your neck? They're cervicals, cervical vertebrae. So the cervical plexus originates next to the cervical vertebrae. The brachial plexus, where have we seen brachia? Biceps brachii, triceps brachii. Brachia refers to arm. And so this is going to be sending signals to our shoulder and arm. And then the lumbosacral also refers to portions of our spine, the lumbar vertebrae and the sacral vertebrae. The lumbosacral is often combined into a single plexus. Technically it is too, but it's a bundle of nerves that will innervate our hip and our lower limb. So looking at them a little bit more closely, the cervical plexus provides all of the innervation, meaning all of the sensation, all of the motor signals to everything in our neck and our throat internally. With one major exception, there's a single nerve right here called the phrenic. You don't need to know that one. It's just a side note. That nerve starts up here and is going to travel all the way down through your thorax to the base of your thorax, the top of your abdomen, to innervate a single muscle called the diaphragm. That's its job. The diaphragm is a really important muscle. It is the one that allows us to breathe. By contracting and relaxing, it creates pressure changes in your thorax, which causes your lungs to expand and deflate. So the entire control of that process is this little nerve right here. Brachial plexus, all of the shoulder and arm. And then the lumbosacral, again, technically 2. I combine them for the purposes of this class. The biggest difference is that the lumbar also includes the abdomen. Otherwise, it's hips and legs. All right, so all of the major nerves in the body do have names. We are going to cover a small collection of them. They will branch as they travel towards their destinations, and many nerves are going to turn into another named nerve. So the name will change depending on where you are in the body. This is the comprehensive list right down here. You should get that in lab as well in a couple of weeks, but I will be breaking it down by portion. And the first set come off of the brachial plexus. So again, brachia, arm, this is the one that's coming off to the shoulder. All of the nerves are going to be controlling muscle sensation in the shoulder region and the arm itself. Notice all of these figures have a lot of nerves. You only need to know the ones in the red boxes, so I am simplifying it pretty extensively. So there are 5 that come off of the brachial plexus, and the big separator is whether or not they're going to the front of the arm or the back side of the arm. We will start with the front. So coming off the top of the shoulder, so we're on the lateral side here, you have a single nerve called the musculocutaneous nerve. Runs down the front, outside of the arm. In the middle is the median nerve, middle front, so it's going to be running down the middle of the arm. Excuse me. And then the third is the ulnar nerve, right here, named for the ulnar bone. Therefore, it's on the ulnar side of your arm. So this one's going to be coming off the shoulder and running on the medial side of your arm. 3 nerves on the front: musculocutaneous, median, ulnar. The other 2, the axillary and the radial, are both posterior. So they're going on the back side of the arm. Axillary, axilla, is the anatomical name for your armpit. So this is going to be a nerve on the back side that's innervating things in and around the armpit region. And then the radial nerve travels all the way down the back of the arm to do things along the radial side. So it's slightly more towards the lateral. So I do have pictures of each of these individually. We have the median nerve running anterior, down the front, middle of my arm, all the way down to my wrist. Ulnar nerve is going to start at the shoulder on the medial side, because that's the side my ulna is on. Remember, PU, pinky ulna. The trick with the ulnar nerve is it stays anterior until it reaches the elbow. And then it does something tricky. It's going to dive behind a hook on the humerus. So it'll be posterior for just a moment, and then it comes back to the front and does the rest of the front of the forearm. If you've ever hit your funny bone, what you have done is hit your ulnar nerve on the back side of your humerus. There's almost nothing protecting it there. It is exposed. And so if you hit that specific point, you are pinching your ulnar nerve, and that's what causes that sensation. Musculocutaneous is again the lateral most of my anterior 3. Runs through the bicep on the front, and then is going to follow the lateral portion of the forearm. I did mention that it changes names here to the lateral cutaneous. I double checked the list this morning, and that's not on your list, so you don't have to worry about that one specifically. Okay, so here's the posterior side. So here's my brachial plexus. These are my posterior neurons. They're going to split and dive behind my arm. So notice this is my humerus. Those 2 nerves are diving to the backside, posterior nerves. Here's the back view. I can see the back of my scapula. Here's the axillary coming right underneath my armpit, innervating all of the muscles in that region. The radial comes down and will follow the entire posterior margin of our arm. There's a close-up view of the axillary. Here's the radial coming all the way down the back side, underneath those muscles, innervating everything, all of my extensors on the back side of my arm. That's getting it from the radial nerve. Okay, a couple more minutes here. Lumbosacral, so all of the rest of the named nerves are going to be coming off of the lumbosacral plexus. Again, there's a lot more that we could get into. We're going to focus on some major ones. The obturator nerve and the femoral nerve are the 2 big branches coming off of the upper half of that plexus, so off the lumbar plexus. and off the sacral, so the lower half of that plexus, we have the single very large sciatic nerve. It is the largest nerve in your body. When you see it in the cadaver room, it is almost astonishing just how large the sciatic nerve is. But the sciatic nerve is going to split into our common fibular nerve and our tibial nerve. All right, so each of those individually. The obturator nerve, coming off my lumbar plexus, dives through my pelvis, comes out the anterior of the pelvis, and is responsible for your adductors. So remember our muscle groups, the ones on the medial thigh, the ones that are adducting our legs, those all get their innervation from the obturator nerve. The femoral nerve also comes anterior through the pelvis. The femoral nerve is actually quite short. It's only a few inches long. As soon as it passes the hip junction and gets onto the front of the thigh, so the anterior thigh, it splits and innervates all of your quadriceps. So the femoral nerve is responsible for all of your quadricep contraction. The back side, so we're on the posterior. So from my sacral plexus, that sciatic nerve comes out the back side of my hip. Again, the sciatic nerve is very large. It will travel down the length of most of the posterior thigh. So hamstrings are getting their innervation off the sciatic. The sciatic nerve usually goes all the way down to the knee, but there is anatomical variation here, and I've seen it quite often in the cadaver lab, where the split actually happens further up. The names don't change, it just means the split happened early. Once we split, usually at the length or at the level of the knee, we have the tibial nerve, which is going to stay in the posterior. Tibial nerve does all of my calf muscles on the back side of my leg. The common fibular nerve, also written as the common perineal, because perineal is word for knee region, not knee, it's a different name for fibula, is going to start posterior but wrap around the outside of the knee to head to the front. So here's a different view. Here's my common fibular wrapping around the knee and then coming down to the front of my leg. This is the most commonly injured nerve in the lower leg because it's exposed on the outside of our knee, and that's the thing we hit the most often. All right, I did finish just in time. So there are your key topics. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. That is the list of nerves, to my knowledge, that you're going to be asked to know in lab. And I will try and link that biodigital model as soon as I get back to my office.